Sometimes you've just got to call it quits on a novel. I don't normally believe in quitting, but in this week's episode, I'm going to talk about why I stopped writing my Soundmade Sonata series and how I failed miserably in public. I'm Michael Laron, and this is the Writer's Journey podcast, where you get a window into the life of a working science fiction and fantasy author. I'm on a mission to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I share my progress and discover what inspires my books and how I write them. You can find the show notes for today's episode at michaellaron.com/podcast. This week, I'm taking you behind the scenes of my writing process. Hello and welcome to episode 28. I wanted to give you guys an update on my Soundmade Sonata Urban Fantasy series. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, then you probably heard me talk about it a lot a few months ago. Some of you wrote me, actually, and told me that you were interested in it as well. And then I stopped talking about it. Why? I take pride in the fact that I don't usually quit my novels. I write them from start to finish, even when things get rough. I just prefer to finish what I start, and I'm always glad that I did finish when I look back on the project in retrospect. But this project proved too difficult for me to continue. In episode 3, I talked about the research I was doing for the Soundmade Sonata series. I talked about the research I'd done into Islam, Dubai, Middle Eastern customs and culture, and music. And at this point, I had spent a fair number of hours on research, and I had a lot to show for it. I was about 10,000 words into the novel when I hit a roadblock. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was. So I did some more research, and eventually I discovered the problem. I discovered that it would be a very, very bad idea to mix Muslims and magic together. In Islam, magic is something to be feared. It's the mark of deception and dishonesty. To even dabble with it invites danger into your life, and that's frowned upon. Now, not all Muslims feel this way, but I started researching magic use in Muslims, and most sources I found agreed. That was a problem because my main character was a Muslim and he lived in a Muslim society and he used magic. So you can't have urban fantasy without magic. So I had a problem. I played around with the idea of inventing a religion instead, but that didn't work because the setting was very clearly in a city inspired by Dubai. To set something in a Middle Eastern setting and use any other religion other than Islam just didn't feel right. It also didn't help that the story featured jinn prominently. I couldn't put jinn in the story without the culture that they came from. While that works for Western mythology and cultures, it doesn't really work for Middle Eastern folklore, at least not in a way that feels genuine. So I realized that it would be exceedingly difficult to do this story without crossing some kind of line. It's important to me that my stories are inclusive and not misappropriation in any way, so I ultimately made the decision to quit writing this series until I could make it work. And in order to do that, I'd have to do a lot more research, something that would probably involve travel and speaking to a lot of people, doing interviews, and just a lot of things that I just didn't have time for. So I stopped. That was a career first for me, but it's important to me that I write stories that respect my readers. The last thing I want to do is offend or insult someone who spent their hard-earned money on my work. At least not intentionally. But I learned a lot of things about the Middle East that I can use for future novels, and I look forward to the day where I can use that information. Until then, the Soundmade Sonata series is going in my someday pile. Sometimes failure happens. I definitely failed with this series. I talked about it in public, put myself out there, I had a Pinterest board. I did all kinds of stuff to talk about what I was doing, and most authors would wait until a book was done before talking about it. And I definitely broke that rule. That was something that I did in the past, but I wanted to try something different with this. I wanted to put myself in public, and I definitely failed in public in front of all you guys, but it doesn't bother me. I don't really see it as a failure. In fact, the idea that I failed never even occurred to me until I was writing this episode. I learned a lot about a culture, wrote 10,000 words of a novel, and I ultimately made a hard decision with my readers in mind. That's a win in my mind, and practice for the next time that something like this does happen again. So at the end of the day, I'm going to keep on keeping on, and I'm going to write a new urban fantasy series that I know you guys will love. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed the show, here are a couple ways to help a brother out. If you're listening to this on Anchor, favorite the show. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, do me a favor and write me a review and share it with your friends. You can, of course, visit my website and learn more about my work at michaellaron.com. If you have a question, send me a voice message on Anchor and you just might hear it on the show. Next week, I'll be giving an update on what I'm currently working on, and I'll be answering your questions. Until then, I leave you with a quote. Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Winston Churchill.